Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining to this proposal of the 50% of the Intergen talks. Today we have the honor and pleasure of having with us Mr. Peter Blom. Peter is the former CEO of Triodos Bank and one of its founders in 1980. Under his management, the bank has become a global reference for value-based banking. He also founded the Global Alliance for Banking on Values in 2009 and was the chair of the board in 2021. Today, the Alliance has 65 member banks worldwide. He's also a full-time non-executive board member of the Dutch Central Bank and the co-chair of the Sustainable Finance Lab. Peter, it's a great honor for us to have you today, and we're really looking forward for your work. So thank you once again for being here and sharing your time. And whenever you want, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Matthias. Very nice to be with you. And I see my good friend Tom Yes, who have been working with quite a lot in the Club of Rome on the Finance Hub, and to see how from a Club of Rome perspective we can work on rethinking finance. My background is in banking. I've been a banker all my life. I started at a very young age in Triodos Bank as a volunteer, actually, in 1980, and then joined really a small club of people, 5 people, to start this social bank, as we called it in 1980. And didn't know that I was going to stay there for more than 40 years. And be very happy to build the organization to an international organization. So it's not only in the Netherlands, but also in Spain, in Belgium, in Germany, in the UK, and with a global perspective on investment management. So a lot of microfinance have been created by Triodos, but also one of the largest investors in renewable energy. So I've been quite a long time in what I would call financing change, helping all those projects in the 80s, in the 90s, in this century to mature and to obtain finance and to see how a new economy, how a new sort of way of looking at renewables, also organic farming, new sort of projects in the commons can actually be viable and be the front runners of a new economy we are all looking for. So much later, and I would say that was really at a great recession and crisis, the financial crisis, I became more and more interested in the other side of rethinking finance. And that's what I would call change finance itself. So finance has been seen for many decades as part of the solution, but I felt increasingly that as a system, it was also part of the problem. The way we look from a financial perspective into what's happening in the economy, in society, is from a real financial point of view, and not really from a human point of view or from a real economy point of view. So that is why I became increasingly interested in the question how to change finance after being so long in financing change. Now, those things are interrelated. You cannot do the one without the other. You need proof of what you can finance in change. And at the same time, you can also sort of go back to what is needed to change the financial system if you have been really in the banking itself. So that's what I've been doing for more than 40 years. I'm very happy that now with a number of think tanks involved and being more focused on change finance. At the moment, I'm not only working for the Club of Rome on a voluntary board basis, but I'm also in the board of the Dutch Central Bank and being involved in, let's say, the more architecture of finance and how that can change, in a much more sustainable direction. What I will do is share with you a short presentation about finance change and change finance. It's very much the result of work we are doing in the Club of Rome, Rethinking Finance Hub, Tom Yes is there, the coordinator. So Tom and I have been working there quite a lot, also on the content behind this presentation. So he can add if I miss out on certain things, because he's very much aware. I will see if I can share the screen now, that you can see what I'm looking for. So this is very much the heading I want to start with. And then I think it's quite important, and that is the second slide, where we really have to try to capture why is actually change finance needed. And you see, and some of you will recognize it, it's a sort of model. The donut model was also used by Kate Raworth when she's describing a more sustainable economy. And what we see today, that the current financial system is actually not a supporter of that system, of a healthy donut economy, but actually extracting values from that system. So in sense of supporting it, it's really extracting. And you see that leads to land degradation, biodiversity loss, and that is also all to do with banks and financial institutions understanding that they can really capitalize on future financial returns of all these sort of ecosystems, but they're not looking really into the ecosystems itself or the social systems, and therefore really exhaust them, and really are not only not helping a more ecological approach or more social approach, but actually contributing in a bad way to it. So where we have to look at is that we create a new financial paradigm, because finance is something we create as human beings. It's not like a natural law. It's there. It's something we create, where many other things are a natural law or an ecosystem. That's not with finance. We can create it. We have to think very hard about how we want to do it, because if it's there in a certain paradigm of system, it's hugely powerful and can really destroy or support human-oriented developments. So two pictures, an extractive financial system or a more supportive financial system. And that is really where we are working on, also in the Club of Rome, to make that design for a more supportive financial system. So how would you then define a regenerative, that's actually a better word than a sustainable financial system? A financial system what really is able to regenerate values for humans. And I think there are three principles on a very high level, but are very important and has a lot of effect if you think them through. Really, if you think them through, and we come to that in my presentation. So what is important? So they have to be directed by a purpose. And actually that means that it's not a bank or a financial institution is not about making money with money. That can also be a purpose, but that's not a purpose that is accountable to the principle of the people, society, and the planet. So the purpose of a financial institution is incredibly important to define that right and accept also the consequences of that. The second thing is, a financial institution should really favor what I would call integrated value over purely financial value. That is the money, making money with money aspect. It's a whole system goal, and we have no clue in the financial system up to now what all the consequences are of our actions. We finance certain developments, but we do not really look beyond what we are affecting with that. And we have to develop very clear policies, practices, reporting and regulations to make much more clear what the integrated impact is on the value chain in the real economy. And then a third one, and that is also quite fundamental, that it should require financial institutions to become actually active agents in this whole change, what is needed, and really focus on the long-term value creation. So far, banks have been really looking at maximizing profit short-term. So this is the opposite approach. It's about long-term value creation. And sometimes value creation also has an element of profit, but also has other elements. And sometimes you think you create a lot of profit and value, but you actually don't, because other parts of society are losing money on it. So it's a very integrated approach again on the banking side to look at what is the long-term value creation in a more holistic way. So this is sort of the basic principles, I would say, for a regenerative financial system. And that is still not how you can organize it. There is a lot of more things to do, but it has at least the ambition to formulate what are the important building blocks that we should use for that. Now, there is always an interesting question: how do you sort of build this new generative financial system? And what we are using there in the Rethinking Finance Hub is really the levers of potential. On what level can you really start to change things? And actually, the most simple one is actually the configuration of system structure and flows. That's the smaller circle down under, if you can see. You can make your products greener, more social, and that is what many banks are starting to do in the last, I would say, decades. Within the current system of finance, they try to do better, to drive better. The second level is already much more important. You really integrate fully a different pattern of relationships in your organization. I would call that the micro level. I would say that Triodos Bank and many other global alliance banks are really trying to do that. Patterning the relationship and embedding them completely in the organization. So it's not just a product or a service, but it is in the whole purpose of the organization you want to do it. That's the next level, so to speak. And maybe you start with the first one and then come to the second one. Some organizations do that at once. Triodos Bank was really founded as an organization that completely on micro level wants to be sustainable. We never finance anything what was not sustainable. Then the third level is much more on what we call then the meso level. That's more on the financial system level. So it's not society as such. It's still trying to bring the whole system more in a sort of sustainable way. And there you talk about measurements, there you talk about capital requirements, all those things who make a financial system working more in the direction of sustainability. And the most effective, interesting enough, is that you create a real fundamental mind shift that has to do with people, that has to do with behavior, deep convinces about the role of finance and banking in a sustainable economy. So actually there it's completely thought through what finance means for a sustainable economy and a society. That maybe finance is energy. Finance is something what is in full support of human beings and should not master human beings. So that is really the paradigm shifts, the consciousness, if you like, you need to make fundamental changes. And in many system thinkers have come up with different levels of this sort of approach. So it's not only one big consciousness game, it's also not tweaking a few products to make them greener, but this whole area in between is as important. And I think if we think about system change, about really fundamental changes, we should work on all four levels. So that's from a system change perspective. Then we have identified the main barriers to changing finance. What really makes it so difficult to move from an extractive financial system to more a regenerative finance system? And we actually identified in the hub, the Club of Rome Rethinking Finance Hub, 6 important areas. First of all is the misplaced purpose. So not being clear about the role of finance. If you feel finance is just following society, is just there to make money with money, it's just like any other business, only money is the product, then you have a misplaced purpose. It's very important to get a right purpose. And I think more and more people start to think in that direction, also in the financial sector. What is the purpose of finance? It's not a normal business. It's also not a government position. It's something in between. And maybe when we talk more about the commons, something what is public and private, we are coming as close as possible to what is the purpose of finance. Then the second thing is, and I already mentioned it, is the too narrow notion of value. It can be very easy to see that in the next 3 years, you make a lot of profit in a bank or in a pension funds or in an insurance company, but actually you ignore all the other negatives around it. And to really get a clear picture about value creation, you need to go deeper and describe other aspects of the value creation. I think we have to go to a long-term, really societal value creation. What is a better way of measuring success of banks than just a very narrow one of the profit per share? So it's an important new way of reporting that is needed there. Then we get a third one is really the outdated analytical frameworks. To look at everything from a risk-return perspective, you miss out really on the bigger picture. So what we did in Triodos, for example, we added to risk-return, we added impact. And impact is not a result, impact is a deliberate way of measuring the impact you want to have as a bank, and do not only look at the risk and return component. So it's quite an important aspect of your analytical framework. The fourth one is the flawed mathematical models. And what you see a lot in banking, and maybe you're not all aware of it, that the data from the past decide if you finance something what is having an impact in the future. And I can give you one example. We have in the Netherlands, for example, we have this very traditional high chemical agriculture. And there are a lot of data available from that. And if you want to start an organic farm and you are measured by the models of the past, the rear view mirror, so to speak, you never will be successful in applying for a loan. So how to develop models who can look much more forward and maybe are limited on data, but at least have more vision in it. I think that's a fundamental issue at the moment in finance. The past is determining the future, and we all know that the future has to be different than the past to realize the change. Then the fifth one is the passive agency of finance. So many banks feel, well, the government has to set the rules for the transition to a more sustainable economy. We will just follow, where we all know that the power of money to create change and to steer change then will be very much underestimated. So I really hope that we can really bring this passive agency to a more active agency, of course, in the framework of what's needed in society. And then last but certainly not least is that in the financial sector, there is a lack of relational finance. What I mean by that more and more people are getting support from a bank based on many transactions and not about stewardship and relationship. Particularly also in local communities, people were used to having this relation with their banks. That's all gone now. It's all measured by data and transactions, and takes out actually what you can see in a relation, what is a forward-looking approach. So the lack of relational finance, relationship banking is really something what is a barrier to change finance. Now you can think of all sort of solutions for that, and also in the Club of Rome, we have formulated a series of researchers, projects, principles, how you should look at that. So misplaced persons, the answer is really to reconnect finance, to reconnect people with finance with local communities, SMEs. What now is from the current purpose, making money with money, you not automatically look at them. So we have to reconnect finance with the real needs of people, I would say. And that is a different role than the finance business does today. So the narrow notional values, more integrated value creation, show that also in the reporting. There are some initiatives going on there. I think that can really help if a bank report on value creation and not only on profits and on risks, make that broader. We already mentioned that the impact added to the whole risk and return approach, the golden triangle, impact, risk, return, will change the way we look at projects, at applications for finance. The mathematical models, I already mentioned that, make them more future-proof, maybe work more with scenarios if there are not enough data yet, but at least make them more future-oriented. For a more forward-looking active agency of finance, you need also an appropriate governance. If you just work for shareholders, you will never reach that. So we have to look at different forms of governance for banks to make it possible that they look also forward and become more an active part of society, a real actor who make things work in society from a bigger holistic approach. And then I mentioned already the lack of relational finance. Reintroduce, not by giving up all the transactional part of banking, but reintroduce human relations. There are some banks now who start again locally to have small offices where people can go to and feel at least heard. And it's not just you send in your request and you get an answer and that's it. Really bringing back the human relation dimension. I want to sort of summarize it that we go from an extractive financial industry to a more inclusive finance. And I think we have some very interesting people on our side there. This is one of the expressions of Antonio Guterres from the UN. So we need to redesign our financial system in order to be able to take into account vulnerability and not only GDP. He mentioned that at the COP, in the last COP in November. And I think it's a very interesting sentence because it does express the heart of the issue. It's not just about GDP, it's also about other values, and they look more vulnerable, but they really contribute to the more human-oriented and planetary-oriented economy we need. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope that the presentation gives you some insights how we move from just financing change to change finance. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Peter, for such an amazing presentation. I think there's a lot of concepts into it and a lot to think about. So the floor is open for whomever wants to probably do a comment about Peter's presentation or ask a question. Please raise your hands with the proper button or put the question in the chat. Yes, Catherine, please go ahead.
So hello. Well, thank you very much, Peter, for your interesting presentation. I'm also working in the financial sector for many years. I'm also switched to a more sustainable view and way of doing finance. I really believe in it. I still think, as you said, there are some banks and financial institutions moving into the right way, but many others are still lagging. And I wondered what you think about what Europe is doing now with SFDR so sustainable finance, a lot of initiatives, taxonomy, also from the corporate side, the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive, the Due Diligence Directives. There are a whole framework which might push or accelerate another way of doing business, including another way of doing finance. And I'm wondering what you think about that. Do we need more regulation to change our mindset, or do you have other magic solutions?
Shall we first collect a few questions and then I give you a sort of, yeah, maybe some more questions and maybe I can connect them. Is that okay, Matthias?
Yes, please. I don't know who else wants to go. Please raise your hands or put the question in the chat.
Or shall I just start by answering? Then other people can think about more questions. That's also fine.
Well,
No,
I'll throw one. If it's okay, I'll throw one myself. What role do you think? Well, I'm actually from Argentina, and we know that global institutions dedicated to finance might be more hurtful sometimes than actually helping, like the IMF. So, what role do you think that the actual? What role do you think that the actual institutions, international financial institutions, are playing right now into this financial transformation?
and you mean the IMF, the World Bank, and that sort of institutions?
Yes, exactly those.
Yeah. And I think with Clara was also having a question. Is that correct, Clara? Yeah.
Oh, hi, Peter. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was pleased that you added at the end more about people. And obviously your principles are very interesting, but how can they also have more of a sense of priority? And this was something that we thought about in a creative way. There's something called the Sustainable Finance Sculpture Initiative. And we tried to look at finance from, more of a holistic and the way that it's all connected up. And I could see that maybe could be something. So obviously there's the whole net zero and nature, that banks in the financial sector, they must align their balance sheets with biodiversity, etc. Connecting and communicating the impacts. And then also, the financial sector essentially is there to serve everyone. So it's those sort of three priorities, I think, that need to emerge to make it more sort of touchable, tangible to your principles, perhaps.
Yeah, I think I will start with, and then we come with Michaela and Vincent later. I think there is a sort of connection between the three questions. I would say it's quite important that you do not go for a silver bullet solution and then everything will change. I think transition, what I learned, is something what you have to do on different levels. You have to look at the people, almost on the mind shift level. You have to look at the institutional level. How do you organize the governance? I feel it will be very difficult if we have the traditional listed company basis for banks to make them greener. I think there will be a limit to that. And we really need to change the whole governance structure of banks, that they can work for all stakeholders and not just for shareholders who want to do it greener. Because in the end, that is too one-sided. There's only one stakeholder. So we have to make that broader. So I do feel that that taxonomy can help, all these directives can help. But I think one of the core issues where there is a limitation in how effective they are if you do not look at the governance of banks. And that's what I said earlier. I strongly believe that they belong in the commons, what means in their structure, they have to be anchored in a public and a private sort of interest. And what you see now, look at the problems with the American banks nowadays and with Credit Suisse in Switzerland. If as long as there are profits, they are sort of personalized, they are for the markets, for the investors. And if there are problems, then they are socialized. Then society pay for them. We have to overcome that mechanism and make sure that banks never go for profit for individual shareholders, and if it all goes wrong, society will pay for it. That happened in the financial crisis, and it cannot happen again, but it is happening again. You can see that time and again, and that has to do with the governance structure of banks. So you have to add that in your priorities. So just having a directive or a taxonomy is not enough. It will help. It will sort of steer those banks a little bit in the direction, but the fundamental change will always only take place when we make much more clear what is the purpose of the financial system, including the banks, and how do we embed it in a good governance system, where maybe it's maybe one of the first places where we work much more with a stakeholder model, and we have an annual general meeting of stakeholders and not of shareholders to decide what has to happen with that bank. And I think that is a quite important thing where I've seen the limitations of just tweaking the current system in a more green way. So yes, it helps what's happening on a European level, but it's not enough. It has to be much more fundamental. And I think in prioritizing, is it first about people? Is it first about planet? I think that the whole model for banks, in addition to this governance question, is that they start to report much more clearly on impact, risk, return. I think that is quite important that you put impact not as a nice add-on, but that's a fundamental way of reporting about your activity, and particularly of banks. And one of the ways they do that now, they have to do it now, is sort of reporting on the CO2 emissions in their balance sheet. That is a form of impact reporting, but I would also include social aspects and other aspects. And if you don't do that, you are not allowed to run a bank. As simply as that. You have to be very strict in that. If you don't produce an annual financial report, you're not allowed to be a bank. The same with impact reporting, and connect them to the risk and return component. What about the international organizations like the World Bank and the IMF? I think they should really look at this whole question from a global point of view. I think there is a lot of accumulation of capital in the north, where it has to be redistributed to the south. As you all know, there is still more money coming from Africa to the Western world than from the Western world to Africa. There is still a wrong direction of money, I would say, where the investments are needed. I think the big institutions of our world, like the IMF, like the World Bank, they have to ensure that also on a global level, there is the right distribution of money. And I would say not money as such, but what money enables. It's about resources. It's about allocating resources worldwide. And I think with the whole transition to a more sustainable economy, that is the role they should now fulfill. There is, for example, the idea that many of the Western world countries should really allocate the special drawing rights were issued by the IMF should be given to countries in the south, so that they can really have much more access to finance possibilities than at the moment, and should not borrow it from the banks in the north, but really are helped by the special drawing rights to do their projects. That's a different way of looking from a very global macro level to these institutions than what's happening today. I hope that's an answer for you, Matthias. More questions. There were a few hands I saw. Michaela was there. And who else was there?
I believe Vincent.
And Vincent. Yeah.
Right. Thanks so much, Peter, for the presentation and for this conversation. My name is Michaela. I'm with the Climate Safe Lending Network. I think that you actually might have touched a little bit on the question that I had when you talked about governance, but you in your presentation listed several challenges, and I was kind of curious about like the challenge within the challenge, like why is it so hard to overcome these, and a little bit also to the question of like prioritization, like where you start in overcoming these challenges.
Yeah, what are the main challenges? Yeah, Vincent?
Yes, hi, Peter. I'm Vincent van der Lois from Finance Watch. First of all, thank you very much for this session. You already actually answered my initial question, which was really the role of regulation into the transition of financial sector. But I would like maybe to extend on your answer and pointing maybe something that you mentioned, the question of impact and how to make sure that we do not purely, as you said, change the financial system, but we actually change the real economy behind. And by that, what I would like to have is having your view on how can we ensure that we are not purely decarbonizing or making the investments greener, but how can we also ensure that we promote the transition of typically fossil fuel sector. And I will maybe make the link with what we've seen quite recently in the news about BNP Paribas, who was being sued because they have quite a lot of investments into the fossil sector, when BNP Paribas is arguing that they contribute actually with the investment to make those, I would say, highly polluting sectors greener. And how would you see it evolving to make sure that we not just divest from, I would say, a polluting economy and leaving it to like more polluting countries eventually, but that we also make sure that the global economy is also getting greener. So I'll maybe stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's a big question and a big challenge, because as we all know, that the governance of the world is not automatically sort of serving this global need of decarbonization. I think there are different phases in different countries, and I would say, for me, coming from a Western country, I think a good starting point is look at the footprint, the carbon footprint per person in my country, and that is still far higher than many other countries who really are wanting to have a next step in their development. So I think, first of all, we have to be really humble in the Western world about what we have done in the past, and say at least we should try and not to export our pollution, but really cleaning our pollution in a different way of living, really compensating in our own countries for what we are doing, and not saying, well, we have the luxury to export our problems with CO2, because then you don't solve anything. And I think, and allow a little bit space for the countries who still at the beginning of their economic and development to give them a little bit more space to develop their economy. So I think there is a sort of fairness what has to come into the allocation of CO2 and the measures you have to take. And I come back to the question of Matthias, I think the international institutions like IMF and World Bank, they play quite an important role there. But I feel that what I see in many European countries, and you probably recognize that, they feel that they are doing a great job, and actually in other parts of the world is not sufficient. I feel actually that we in Europe are not doing sufficient. We still have per person a far too high footprint, and we should change that and come up with sort of smart solutions to reduce that. And then I think the next step is, if those smart solutions are also applicable in new upcoming economies, we should make them available to those upcoming economies so they don't go through the same sort of polluting cycle as we have been going through. So we should make it from a real effort we have to take also to an opportunity of these new economies. That is, I think, the sort of high-level thinking we have to introduce. And I strongly believe that is in the interest of all of us to go that direction. And I think one of the main challenges in today's world is that the governance of the globe, so to speak, is not going in the right direction. We again, instead of a global community, we have sort of an Eastern Bloc, we have a Western Bloc, and we have even war in Europe and in other parts. So it's not a helpful environment. Still, I believe that we are 5-10 years further down the road. This is where we have to go for. So although there is some really bad news at the moment, I think this is where the world should really head for. So the redistribution of sort of CO2 allocations, and really try to innovate and share those innovations in a much more generous way than we have done so far. And I feel the whole economy, whole society will benefit from that. I'm quite convinced. It's happening in Europe to a certain extent, but that's also a small part of the world. It's happening within countries. The moment you start to be generous about those things, you start to solve it. And that is the sort of step we have to make. Is that the main priority? I think the main priority at the moment is, I would say, to convince banks, and therefore you need also regulation that is more effective to go in the road of sustainability. So I think the whole agreement the financial sector made with the Paris Treaty in the background, that they want to reduce the CO2 in their balance sheet, is a way of trying to change the consciousness within banking and within finance to make it less dependent on fossil fuels. I think that helps. In the end, is the question if that is sufficiently safeguarded by a good governance of banks, or does it just come from this sort of regulation? I think in the end, we also have to bring that to the purpose of a bank, and also to the people working in the banks, that is the new economy. That is not something, so everybody respects human rights. Not everybody, but most find it a quite logical way. I think this also has to become a quite logical way, that you do not finance fossil fuels because it's hurting people, in a more general way. I think that's an important step we have to make. And so the priority is very much now on finding the instruments to make clear to the banks that they have to reduce those things, and then hopefully they will also integrate that into their culture, in their purpose. But I think that cannot be just done by regulation. It has to be a bigger mindset. What I was describing earlier, a really paradigm shift in the thinking about what is the role of money.
We have 2 questions on the chat, and next way, it's well pronounced, are discussing international accounting standards within Europe. And Catherine DeLange says, smart solutions will not solve our climate or biodiversity issues unless we couple them with that degrowth mindset. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I think the degrowth movement has become very strong, and I really I support the fact that they bring that to the table, because growth has been a sort of ideology. We can only solve problems if we grow, and I think therefore the whole definition of growth is not smart enough, so to speak. I think growth, it is for me about long-term value creation. What is something different than growth? So long-term value creation is a sort of result of doing more green, and letting that grow, and degrow the fossil fuels activities, to put it very simply. And I think the result has to be that there is more value in the end, and that is planetary value, and that is human value. And that could mean less material stuff and more sort of happiness for people. But I'm not sure if you take the simple reaction on growth, degrowth, if that is the right answer. I think it is about long-term value creation, and long-term value creation can also be not material. The big problem, I would say, from growth is that it's all about material growth, and the planet cannot afford that. But if you expand the whole notion of growth in a different direction, then culture, for example, I would really be in favor of growth of culture, about more social happenings. Then I think growth is not so bad at all. But there should be definitely degrowth quite significantly on fossil fuels. So if I play a little bit with the definition of growth or degrowth, I would say we have to go a little bit further than that. So that's my take on degrowth. I hope I'm not offending anybody who is very much in favor of degrowth, but I think it's very good to think those things through. And in the end, I think we mean the same, but we have also to find the right sort of definitions in that. And there was one other question I was and there are initiatives. The question is, are there initiatives in working on the international accounting standards within? Yes,
Yes, exactly.
The whole accounting standards are working on this more integrated reporting initiative, as this is called. So you have not a separate chapter on impact and sustainability, but you integrate it in the value creation of your company. And I think that's a very positive development. The question is quite important. Is it something voluntary, or has it to be mandatory? I would say we have to move to a situation where it is mandatory, where you cannot have a situation where the financial reporting and the risk reporting is mandatory, but the impact reporting is voluntary. It must have the same consequences for your license to operate as a financial institution or as a business. And if we don't do that, then it will always be a little bit like nice to have. And if it becomes tough financially, then we forget about it. So I think it's quite important that we take extra steps there and we push for extra steps. But the initiatives are there, absolutely.
We have Nolina raised hand, and also share once again.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, earlier you mentioned solutions that are shared with, other countries' newer economies, I think is the term you used. One thing that I've seen a lot from, being South African, the anxieties about that is that the solutions are not shared. They're typically sold. And so it becomes another extractive thing because they're sold at quite a premium to the countries. So it just becomes another avenue to extract as much value as you can from economies such as the one I come from. So there's a lot of anxiety within even just my country about this proposal coming in from your COPs and etc. The conferences that we tend to attend that are saying that Europe needs to give more technologies to Africa, is that it's just another way for Europe to sell something new to Africa at very expensive, but also just my chemical engineering experience, a lot of the time, these technologies, because they were not built with the context in mind, they tend to be very ill-equipped to solve the problems they're trying to solve. And then, but this is on a mechanical standpoint now, just sharing an experience I have from a mechanical standpoint, is that, and then the maintenance of that. So even just the knowledge is not shared, the technology is sold. So then to have the knowledge to maintain the system or all of that sort of stuff, you then have to go back and contract the same company because the patents are not in the economy, are not shared across economies, etc. And I have a feeling that there's probably financial tools or something to that effect that follows a similar model. So it's just inviting more extraction. We need, again, that paradigm shift that you're speaking about, to think differently about how we share knowledge across different economies.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think, I don't think automatically make everything to a donation is the good way to go, but to make it only a business decision with maximizing profit is not including I would say the geopolitical context, the historical context, where countries simply has not been able to develop their economy properly, all those things should be included. And I think it's a very important question, what is done in what they call blended finance approach. Some of things can really be done in a commercial way and should be done in a commercial way, vice versa, internally in the country, coming from the north to the south or from the south to the north. And some of the things really have to be done more on a gift economy basis, because it is important that you help people to really develop the next step in their economy before they can really sort of work in that context independently from help from, for example, rich countries. And I think that has not happened very well. I think it was too much donor money in the first place, then it became all commercial. We went to the other side. And it is a matter, like in every development, what is the right balance between the two, and what is appropriate, and what is in one country works well in another country has to be slightly done differently. So I think that is really the answer, what I would say. But sharing our knowledge is through a market mechanism is not the way, I think, forward. In some cases it is, in many cases it's not. So I fully agree with you, Nolita, that that's not always helpful.
I think Chiara had another question before moving once again to the ones in the chat box.
Well, my brain has slightly gone in a different direction since I put my hand up, but I think in terms of this regenerative economics or regenerative financial system, the long-term value creation that you mentioned, very important, but what are the incentives for systemic financial health? What are the sticks for systemic financial degradation? What are the incentives to have a healthy financial system within the context of people, planet?
Yeah, I think the first question you have to ask, does that all work through incentives? I mean, some things work through incentives, but other things are simply by structuring it in a different way. So the moment you require from banks, and that's not an incentive, but as a regulatory sort of condition you provide, that you say, well, a bank should report on their impact, and if they don't, they are not allowed in the end to act as a bank, because a bank has such an impact on the development in society that this is something you have to do. We also do not accept that the bank is not producing an annual report, a financial annual report. Then it's not a bank anymore. So we should really go on that level where we say, if you want to be a full-grown participant of this transition, this society, this is what you have to do. And we are still in the phase where we say nice to have. So I agree with you, regulatory can really help in that sense. On the incentive base, you can see, I give you one example. I've been promoting for a long time that capital, that you should have higher capital as a bank if you invest in fossil fuels. That should make them less interesting for a bank to invest in. My current thinking is more that we should really require from a regulatory point of view from a concentration risk point of view, that we limit the part of the portfolio, what can be in fossil fuels, and make that lower year by year. So a real physical limit, because I do feel with higher costs for capital, it will just have an impact on the market, and it will be priced in the market, and it will not really change the absolute reduction of the use of fossil fuels. So I think we really are on a track where we have to see what is the most effective way of bringing institutions to lower their sort of involvement in fossil fuels. So there I really changed my mind. I thought the market would solve it because of pricing. Now I believe that from a regulatory point of view, it's more easy and more effective to say, well, dear bank, you are now 30% in fossil fuels of your portfolio. We want in the next 7 years to bring it back to 5%. And we are simply going to measure that. And not like we make your capital more expensive or this or that, because then you create also sort of market mechanisms who will deal with that. And we all know from market mechanisms that they can do quite a lot of good things, but also can maintain things as they are. But just by organizing a different price doesn't solve it necessarily. But that's my view. And sometimes I have discussions there with other bankers. What is the best way? I hope that gives a little bit of an answer, Chiara. I see Raad.
Yeah, well, Peter, you're kind of on fire with the questions. We have two from the chat box before we move to Rad and then Vincent once again. Alois asks, how do we part from GDP as main indicator for nation/banks? And Sneak, who gave us the honor to be with us today, says economic growth means growing our capacity to increase the well-being of all people while restoring ecosystems. Not sure if this can be done with the current money system.
Yeah, I would say I would say instead of economic growth, I would say creating long-term value is what I would see, and that is growing our capacity, because economic growth has still this definition problem about what do we mean. But I do think we need a different money system, and that is very complicated how you do that, because maybe we have to go as far that is who is being in charge of creating new money to finance new activities. And so far we have dedicated that to the banks, private banks, who can, based on the banking system, create money through providing loans to companies. And actually the direction of the money creation, how it is used, and also the volume a little bit more, but not the direction, is very hard to control as a community, as a society. So I could well think of in the future that the whole money creation as an instrument to direct growth and to maybe also limit growth when it's too much extractive is something we have to think through. And meaning that banking is not so much in the creation of money business anymore, but more in the assessing the risks and sort of looking at the overall societal questions and not by creating more money as such. So that is quite a fundamental question where I agree that the current money system has not a subtle aspects of directing where we want to go. And actually, if we don't take that on, I think it will be very hard to have fundamental changes. Now, creating money is a very, even with economists, a very challenging topic. Who is creating money and what is money? And so we can go much further there. But I do think, and I think that Anne is referring to that, but she can better say it herself, that maybe the whole money creation system is something we have to look into. More questions on the chat, or do we go?
Yes, but we go with Rad first, please.
Hi, I have a very kind of a basic question, because the entire time this conversation was happening, I couldn't help but notice that the entire conversation was happening with Europe as a center, like Europe as a center to all the issues and the financial systems that we're talking about. So my question is then, is this a process that needs to happen with Europe as a center and most of the world as peripheries, or Europe is providing solutions to certain problems? Or is there possibly other ways where we can juxtapose separate, different contexts of how banking systems run in the different world, how finance runs in the rest of the world, or most of the world, and move forward?
Yeah. I would say that diversity is also in the financial system very important. So I'm not claiming there is only one solution for all countries in all cultures. You are in different phases. When I meet with my colleagues in North America, that it's very clear that the entrepreneurial approach to banking, it's much stronger than, for example, in Europe, where it's more a cooperative approach. And I think in many countries, look at microfinance, it's more the developmental approach what has been taken. So I would not say there is only one approach and that's the right one. I think what I learned from the Global Alliance for Banking Values, I founded in 2009, and with its 70 banks now, that there is one thing what we all share, that it is about humans and human dignity. So it's not something, and that sounds very general, but I think it's quite important that every banker has still in front of him or her, what is the interest of human beings, and can I help there with sort of creating an enabling environment in a good way to help in this phase, in this particular location, in this situation, these people to grow their business, to improve their lives. I think that is what the basic ethics of a bank is. But there are really different forms and ways of doing that. The cooperative ways, the entrepreneurial ways, the development bank ways. So you can then find out very easily what is the best way in my situation as a governance form. So if you read what I said, it has all to be the same. That's not the case. But there are principles we all share as a global community, and we should work with them. And I think they are more about human values and human dignity. And there is also embedded, there's also integrated the cultural aspects. In certain cultures, it works differently than in other cultures. So we should acknowledge that and not try to make it all fit for one. Is that an answer to your question, Raad, or not?
It's close to an answer.
Close to an answer. Okay. You're honest.
Because for me, I was trying to shift focus on how then do we move this perspective of this is still an approach that is very European in its roots, right? So I don't think anybody has an answer to that yet, but yeah, that's why it was close to an answer, and maybe the challenge is then to figure out how we move forward together.
But do you know the organization Grameen and BRAC from Bangladesh?
Yes, that was my initial. That was what I was thinking about when I was reforming these questions, because I'm from Bangladesh myself, and yeah. So this was the bank I had on the back of my head. I was thinking how they operate and all the things that they're doing, which is not very European way, or even North American. So there are already existing social, very humane financial systems in place in the world, even now, for example, with Grameen Bank. So even with these things existing, then how do we then talk about Europe? How do we then also juxtapose this kind of a European model when there are practices like this already existing in most of the world?
Yeah, but I would not claim that, on the contrary, that the European model is helping there. I think we learned as European banks quite a lot from BRAC Bank, how they approach economic and social issues in their country, and much more advanced than what's happening in Europe and in the US. So I think the beauty of the Global Alliance is, and BRAC was one of the founders, the co-founders, that there is a lot of mutual learning, and the unity we feel is more in the human dignity, but diversity is very much in the different approaches. And I think that BRAC in many ways is much more advanced than many community banks in the US or in Europe. So that's simply true. So it's not like I don't think there is a sort of thing that's a European model. I think actually in the Western world, banking has been much too powerful and overtaken a lot of lives of people, where in some countries like Bangladesh, but not everywhere in Bangladesh, by the way, unfortunately, but there is much more of this sort of Brak and Grameen approach available. So I think Bangladesh can be proud of that.
Thank you.
So Peter, if it's okay with you, we have Vincent with his hand raised, and
Yeah.
then question more in the chat, and then we
Yeah.
we can sum up because we're getting closer the to the time that was set up.
Thank you, Matthias.
Vincent, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, Peter, I would just like to come back on the point that you mentioned regarding the increase of capital requirements for investing into fossil fuels. You may know that Finance Watch was actually a big, really in favor of increasing capital requirements. And I would just like to have your view, because as I would say an alternative solution, you mentioned that, and it will be a triple question. You mentioned that it would be interesting to cap the global investment into fossil fuels. But my first question, and I will continue with the others, is how would we be able to do it when we see that at the COP27, the countries were already not able themselves to commit to a phase out into the oil and fossil fuel energy on the one hand. On the second hand, and I would interpret it, let's say, as anyway a decrease of the production of oil. So somehow a decrease of production would, in my view, be translated into an increase of the price, which will be in the end also transferred into on the communities themselves. And I think the third point that I wanted to mention, maybe you have also a view on that one, is beyond the question of transitioning. I think the increase of the capital requirements also have a role of better managing the risks and better integrating the actual risk that is represented by investing into fossil fuels. So I just wanted to have your view. I know we could have like a long debate on that, but thank you.
Yeah. No, but your question is really fair, Vincent, because I think we are so used to incentives, to sticks and carrots in a market environment that we logically look at how can we use it now to make it more sustainable. So I've been educated in that, and I've been working in that for a long time. But I also have seen that making everything to a sort of market with sticks and carrots is not always benefiting everybody, but is benefiting normally the rich people and not helping the poor people. Because you do something with pricing, and pricing gets up, and then people feel like, well, then people will use it less. But if you're at the bottom of society, the alternatives are not so great. You cannot easily invest in a solar panel because you don't have access to finance, where a rich person can more easily deal with that higher price and maybe do not go for a solar panel, but buys a Tesla and feels suddenly very happy about it, what they contributed, where in the end, maybe that's not the real contribution we need. So that's why I feel from moving it to the market, to the demand side, I think we have to move now as a society more to the supply side and say, actually the supply of money, the supply of products needs to be more regulated, because otherwise by just market incentives through sticks and carrots, the risk is too high that we don't change a lot, and we create a big social divide between people, what I think is not a real supportive element politically we need at the moment. So that's why I start to think more in the financial sector, which I know, from relative measures to more absolute measures. And actually in banking, that is more easy. When I talk to my board in the Dutch Central Bank, I say, what's more easy, to do it through capital surcharges, extra capital, or through concentration risk. I say concentration risk, we know already how to do that, because we have concentration risks as an instrument to limit them throughout our supervision. So if we feel that banks are too much exposed to fossil fuels for several reasons, we can simply say, we want you to reduce that exposure and set a limit on the concentration risk. So I thought if we sort of have that thought, take that thought seriously, and it's also more practically, and the urgency we are in, maybe that's more effective than my original thinking that it was maybe through sticks and carrots with capital requirements. Can you see my line of reasoning, Vincent?
Yes, thank you. I indeed see the point, but I still believe that increasing or decreasing the production will also be affecting the poorest, I will say, communities, in the sense that, I mean, in the end, except having social funds, as it is the case for the their emission trading scheme that is being developed and adapted at the moment, I do believe that in any case, it will climate change, but also the transition itself will be impacting certainly the poorest communities first, before, of course, the richest, which will be able to transition. But I thank you for your point.
No, it's a complicated topic. I see what you mean, but I do feel that by just doing it through prices and markets, it will sort of create unexpected social issues, which I want to avoid, to do it more from an offering side, from a supply side. And I think we are by far over time that we can still do it through markets. Partly we can do it, but partly we have to be much more restrictive, and maybe use, if there are higher prices and higher taxes, using them to really also subsidize alternatives in a phase where they otherwise will not come about. So I think a sort of forceful mechanism to move it from fossil fuels to more sustainable, I think it's really needed.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so finally we have Echo's question saying, what are your thoughts on the concept of a well-being economy in the context of sustainable finance?
Well, I think the well-being economy is a concept what can replace economic growth, what is a sort of linear ideology, what is not helping us to become more sustainable. So well-being brings in factors, other things we can measure, what is helpful in creating an alternative for simply material growth, because that's what GDP is. They measure financial transactions. GDP is not something what is sort of unclear what it does. It only sort of aggregates financial transactions. And if we sort of bring those, bring elements of well-being in measuring if we progress or not, I think it can really help to move to a more sustainable economy. And we do not feel that we need growth to finance a more sustainable economy, because that is something in itself what is not working in the end. I mean, we cannot first create more CO2 and then have more money to reduce it again. It has to be done in an integrated way nowadays. And that is still what some economists and also government people believe. We have to grow to deal with the sustainability challenges. I think the well-being economy concept helps you to integrate those things straight away, but measure it in a different way, and therefore make also clear that it is successful. That's how I look at a well-being economy.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. You've been struggling with questions for the last hour or so.
No problem.
maybe before we close up, any final comments, suggestions, ideas you would like to leave to the audience?
Well, what I normally said also during the financial crisis, now some 12, 13 years ago, we have to realize, and that's maybe for your generation much more new, we are all bankers nowadays. I mean, meaning that in our lives, there is a real life economy side, but there is also a financial side. We have banks, pension funds, insurance companies to manage that for us. But in the end, we have also a personal responsibility for how we deal with money, with our day-to-day transactions. Everything we buy has an effect on what is produced, so has an effect on people, has an effect on the planet. So that is something we start to realize more and more. Our savings, our investments, they have a much longer term and more fundamental effect how the economy is developing. So making different decisions there. And that was my whole life in Triodos, to make more transparent what money is actually doing in the economy. It's not like I save money, I take it out again. Based on savings, banks make decisions and steer the economy in certain directions. And I think the third part is that there are a lot of developments who just cannot be financed by sort of money that's looking for a return. So the whole gift money, the donation money is still needed on all levels. People can only develop freely when they are made money available to them to develop themselves. I think that's a very important thinking about money. We call it the threefold way of thinking money: more consciousness in the transactions, more consciousness in saving and investments, and also donate surpluses in a direction that it really creates development. I think that is what I really have been working on for a long time, still working on, and is important for the well-being of the world. So in that sense, money is a quite exciting tool for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter, for being part of this Intergen session, and everyone that has attended today. Just a reminder, as Nolita said on the chat box, that the Intergen sessions are part of our program of the 50%, which is part of the Flow From. It's a youth platform hosted by the Flow From. So it's been a great pleasure. Please stay tuned for our newsletter and our social media for the next Intergens, and hopefully any questions or comments that has been left out of this conversation, Peter will return in a future
It was a great
session.
pleasure. Take care. And I know the presentation is, you have the presentation so you can share it with the participants. Feel free to do it. Okay.
Thank you very much. We will.